Firefighting in Canada's virtual summit. I'm Brianna Charlebois, Associate Editor. Our second live session, The New Back to Basics, will be presented by Mark Vanderfeist. Mark has been in the fire service since 1999 and is a full-time firefighter and international instructor. He is a local level suppression instructor for the Pennsylvania State Fire Academy, the lead author of Fire Engineering's Residential Fire Rescue book, the First 5 Minutes DVD, the 21st Century Firefighter DVD, and president of Firestar Services, Inc. As a reminder, there will be a question period at the end, and you can type your questions into your user interface. We'll hand over the floor to Mark momentarily. But first, please enjoy a word from our sponsor, Target Solutions, the ultimate technology for operational readiness.
Welcome everybody to our afternoon session at the 1 o'clock hour. And for those on the West Coast, good morning to you all. Hopefully you're wide awake to take part in our session here today as we look at the exciting topic of training today's fire service. And my goal for all of those listening in today as the so what takeaway question is, I want you, the audience, to know how to be an effective instructor in today's fire environment in terms of 2020. And I'm sure there are some that are dialing in who are been in the fire service for quite a long time, maybe 30 years of service, maybe those who have only 5. And we have quite a wide spectrum of people who have some experience teaching in the fire service, those who are new to it. And with the current 2020 age upon us, I just want to highlight, maybe discuss with those people, with you guys here today, what can we do to be a much more effective instructor in today's environment. So the topic is training today's fire service. And if you notice with the advertisement, it said roundtable fast attack. The idea is that we're going to look at 5 key areas, or 5 questions rather, that relate to our topic today. And rapid succession, just like we have a fast attack for our fire ground. When you pull up on scene to a structure fire, and that first arriving vehicle can do a quick rapid attack, then pull off the hand line, go in, do both a search and a fire suppression effort at the same time. We're going to do the same mentality here with as far as the fast attack with our topic here today as it relates to training today's fire service. So our first question to look at this morning, or just this afternoon rather, sorry about that, is going to be restrictive regulations. What do we have in place today that are restricting us from being an effective instructor or even training today's fire service? And we can not ignore the prime example set for us right now in our current day, which is going to be the coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic. And certainly that in itself is going to be quite a restriction on each of us as a firefighter or as a fire service in terms of conducting training, let alone even just our regular operations for the most part. But how does that tie into restricting us? Well, depends on where you are from province to province. Let's look at the big picture first from nationwide and then zoom down to our own locality. So on a national level, at the big picture, looking at our country, Canada, restrictive. We have now closed borders, and unless you are an essential worker or those who are able to cross for work on a regular basis, we don't have the opportunity to bring people in to help train. So when we have conferences or special speakers who are being brought up from the US, for example, or other parts of the world, they could come on over and take part and be that special keynote speaker, or they could be the person to conduct a class or workshop. that would help to lead in the training initiative. But with those border closures that we currently have, that's unfortunately stopping that from occurring. So right there in the national picture, we have the closed border situation preventing us from having outside instructors or outside instruction coming to us in person, in essence, to conduct that for us. We got to look at now from a provincial perspective, zooming in a little closer, is with the current coronavirus pandemic, we have now restrictions in place for group sizes. So many provinces have mandated legal requirements that we no longer are able to gather in large groups of maybe no more than 5 people. If it's your immediate family, then yes, but as far as complete strangers, we have no more than 5. And we are just seeing recently some restrictions being loosened where we have now the increase to 10. And in some provinces, it's 15 or 20, depending upon where you go. I think on the West Coast in BC, I think I saw the number as large as 50 for certain conditions there. So it's a wide spectrum from the East Coast to the West Coast in that matter. Looking at provincial travel, as I mentioned with the national side of it, the East Coast and the Maritimes, they have had in place for a while now, since the month of March, their borders closed to outside travelers from the province coming in. And they are just recently announced that they're going to now have this maritime bubble where the maritime provinces can travel within the Maritimes beginning sometime next week, but still outsiders from like Ontario, like myself, if I come in there, I must go through now 14 days of quarantine. So that's also going to be a restriction placed upon a department in how they conduct their training as far as the group sizes, and same thing with the travel. So with the group sizes, how is that really going to help us or negate us? Well, it's restricting us because of the numbers. You think back to February, January, even February of last year, we had training being conducted at your station, and you may have had full turnout with people of 20, 30, 40 people, and at once, as a large group, you're conducting your training classes. Whereas now we've got to think about how can we readdress this in terms of no more than 5 or no more than 10. And those groups themselves have to be spaced out and spread out to, again, fall in line with local compliance in that matter. So now we have to look at how do we train with multiple groups. At one time I could do all 20 people at once, and now I have to look at doing 20 people in smaller group settings, and maybe over a period of days or over the period of a day, as opposed to say in 2 or 3 hours. So for the small departments that are looking at how to overcome this, it's going to be a matter of being creative and having to go back to the drawing board, the whiteboard in essence, and think, how can I take this particular topic and divide it up into maybe 3 or 4 groups, to have groups of 5 or groups of 10, and with instructors and with the spacing and the size of my facility, how can I conduct having only 1 group at a time being taught, or 2 groups at a time that's spaced out from each other, and so on. So that's where the restriction comes in with the regulations on a provincial level. If you zoom in a little closer to a local level, right down to your actual department, it's going to come down to what does your department or municipality specify has to be done with the current coronavirus pandemic. And even though there might be provincial standards and national standards recommended or in place, sometimes departments and municipalities locally will take the extra step to say, well, the province may say we can have gatherings of 10, but we're going to still say we're going to go no more than 5. So it's good to know what the local requirements might be as well for yourself to try and combat and overcome this restriction here. But certainly the coronavirus pandemic is putting a stranglehold on training as a whole, and it is restricting us. And unfortunately, we did have a bit of a holiday, if you can call it that, for a little while, since March 27th, when the border was shut down, and until even today, we're still closed down, where we have still restrictions of what we can and can't do as far as the training side of it within the fire service. Certain provinces, like Ontario, for example, have put out a communique from the fire marshal's office that are notifying departments that with the current coronavirus pandemic, there are exemptions in place. And one exemption is for the essential services. And so those essential services still required to stay open, to operate, such as the fire department, are exempt from some of these provincial requirements such as groupings of no more than 5 or 10, so they can still conduct and carry on with their training regime as it were normally, as far as maybe groups of 15 or 20, but again, adhering to certain standards like maintaining spacing between each other, having things in place for decontamination equipment, hand sanitizer, all this fun stuff to try and prevent the spread of our coronavirus pandemic taking place within our country. Besides the coronavirus side of it, real quick with restrictive regulations, what else is in place? Well, if it was a normal date, a normal year, say 2019, I'd be talking more about the Health and Safety Act in terms of, is it prohibitive or is it productive as it relates to training? And we can certainly debate this for a long time as far as how is it prohibitive and how is it productive in terms of setting the firefighter on the right track to do their job. We have to look at it from a reality perspective. Is the Health and Safety Act set for reality in terms of training? Do we train to reality, or do we train to the Health and Safety Act because we have to, seeing as it's not a situation on the fire ground at that point in time? It's a non-fire ground situation at that point. So if we have more time, we could dive into that in terms of the Health and Safety Act. Is it prohibitive or is it productive? And we have to look at, with that, just to set the stage for the next few points coming down the road here in our session, that we as a fire service, we are a hands-on business. We are not a business where we sit in a desk in an office and work at a computer all day, or we're at a manufacturing assembly line where we just do one thing and we assemble something and that's it. We are a hands-on business that requires us to respond to the unknown at any time. And so with that perspective of our vision in that aspect, we have to look at what the Health and Safety Act, is it set for us to practice as a hands-on business? And same thing with coronavirus and the pandemic we're facing today. Is it allowing us to still train to be a hands-on business? Because that aspect is not being removed. We are still responding to calls, even though the virus is out there running around and everybody's at prey to it. We still don't stop responding to 911 calls. Fires don't stop. Medical calls don't stop. Car accidents don't stop. There may be a decrease or an increase depending upon what the category might be, but our hands-on business still goes forward. And so we have to still be preparing ourselves and training ourselves in that same manner and regiment as we would normally, say in 2019, but for 2020 with a few more precautions to help us address the current coronavirus situation. So rapid fast attack on regulations is now hopefully good for us to move on to our next one, which is going to be what's there presently with our generational gap. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have probably those dialing in who have 30 years experience in the fire service. Those may have 5, 10, 15, and so on. I myself have 21 years experience, and we can certainly identify in the training world, there is a generational gap that does exist when we look at training firefighters, especially today in recruit classes. It's a common thing to hear from a lot of senior instructors. The kids coming in today are completely different. They don't listen, they don't learn. It's a whole new world. They're not sure how to address it. So there is definitely a generational gap that does exist with our training. So what issues are associated with this generational gap? Well, I can think of one, and right now the one primary one is the young person today, that new 21, 22, 23, 24-year-old coming in, has the mindset of, I want it now. Why is that? Because of technology, because of our day and age of picking up a smartphone with access to the internet and access to information on our fingertips at a second or two in terms of time frame. These individuals can essentially download into their minds information at a very quick rate. And when you translate that same perspective onto the fire ground or the training ground in the fire service, they want the same thing to happen. They want to have everything that you know now in them. So 21 years firefighting experience for myself in three different departments, both in US and Canada. And certainly I have a lot of knowledge and skill sets built up over that time frame. And that cannot be dispelled or passed on to someone in a matter of seconds or minutes. But these young people are expecting to have that dumped on them within a matter of a day or two. So why are we going to go through recruit class for 12 weeks when we could do it probably in 1 day or 2 hours? I want to know everything that you know now. And so that's one thing I can think of and can see as being a generational gap training issue that we're facing with in our fire service today. The other thing I can think of as well, that kind of ties in there with our technology, is the books versus phones. Again, we have technology at our fingertips to use that we can take advantage of for the most part, and it does help us in some aspects in terms of training. And we look back at the old days, like I got a bookcase here full of books, fire service books that are used from a time-to-time occurrence to reference or to refresh memory or to draw information out upon to pass on to people. And are we finding ourselves with this generational gap that there's a move away from books and more of a movement towards using phones or different devices that will help teach and help to convey information? And yes, we are seeing that, but there is still an importance or still a need for having books and getting our noses in those books to help us retain and to learn what we need to know, excuse me, theoretically for our job. And I know those who are in recruit classes, you teach maybe a large recruit class of 20 or 30 people, the common obstruction they face, or the common issue they have to overcome, is how do we get our recruits to get their nose in that book? Because they want to instead download the app and use a app on their phone to run through maybe some flashcard questions or perhaps some YouTube videos that someone put together to summarize the chapter or to a Coles Note version of the book itself. But we still got to get them to read the book, because as you and I know, a lot of our testing we face today and have to administer is all based upon a textbook. And without that textbook, there is no test, and with no test, there's no certification for those who are pursuing it. So how do we get them into that book? That's a big issue for us to try and face. And there are many creative ways that we can do that. We can put some parameters in place, such as for recruit class or guys going through a certification class that they have to read the chapter. We're going to assign them the chapter tests. And if they don't do those chapter tests by a certain date and hand them in to the instructor by a certain date, then they're not allowed or qualified to or cleared to write the certification exam. And that sometimes will force them to get their noses in the book and to read the actual book, as opposed to spending more time and focusing upon their phone or the app as the learning device for them to use in that matter. Lastly, with our generational gap issue, is one thing I've observed over the years from my beginnings as a firefighter way back in 1998 to today, is the time we devote to classes. I remember classes on weekends. I first began as a volunteer firefighter in Pittsburgh, down in Pennsylvania or Pittsburgh, in a place called Cranberry Township. And I can recall weekend classes always being about 20 hours, a Friday evening, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And over the course of time, I've witnessed those classes dwindling or decreasing in time from 20 hours now to only 16 hours, only 2 days being devoted, and going from 16 hours down to 12 hours, and from 12 hours going down to 8 hours, and down to 4, and so on. And the question that we can stand back and ask is how much more condensed can we get in terms of trying to cram and fit in all the information, all the hands-on skills in a very short time frame, when we really need to dedicate this much time, but people only want to put in this much time. Can we do things in 4 hours? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Can I take an 8-hour class and get it whittled down to 6 hours or 4? It depends on what we're dealing with. And certainly I will admit there are a lot of topics that you look at the curriculum, lesson plans for the topic, it may say, you must devote or you should devote 8 hours to teach this, and look at the actual material that's being laid out. It won't take 8 hours. However, you have that much time to do it. So yes, you may be able to whittle it down to 6 hours or 4, but should you? Is the content that you're delivering important enough that it needs to have that full 8 hours of attention to be given, to drive home the points, to reinforce the key points, to reinforce the key skills, and to observe those key skills on a continual basis? So again, observation, how much more can we condense our training programs to fit the ever fast changing world we live in today? And again, it does come down to that generational gap of young people wanting things done now. And if it's not done now and within 2 or 3 or 1 hour, then I'm not interested, I lose interest, and I move on to the next thing. And so how do we address it? And again, that could be explored more in more detail if we have more time, but unfortunately we don't. So let's move on to our next topic as far as what we can identify within our industry, and that's going to be with technology. Kind of dovetails into the generational gap. Technology, is it a help or is it a hindrance to the development of the firefighter? And I know every department can look in their own institution and say, yes, we have some form of technology that we are using to help us with training. What I want to first set right now out of the gate, so there's no misunderstanding from anybody, is that there is a place for technology with training. We have to look as an instructor or as a department head, chief, deputy, whatever your rank is or position might be, you have to look at what we're trying to accomplish, what needs to be accomplished, and how can we accomplish it? How do we get there? And what can take us to get into that end result? Will technology help us? Perhaps it will for some of it. Will it do for all of it? I'm going to say probably not. There is certainly a place for it, but it doesn't replace everything. And when I say technology, I'm referring to things like our props, our e-simulators, virtual training, virtual reality training, online learning. There's certainly a place for all of that to fit into the fire service to help us get from point A to point B and so on. But it doesn't replace the whole spectrum of how we get to the end result. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are a hands-on business. That means we have to have our hands working to reinforce the skill sets so that when we do go out on calls, we are going to be both effective and efficient with our job. And we become proficient by doing things repetitiously, by doing it again and again and again. And by doing it again and again, we develop that muscle memory. And those who instruct, who have been in the driver's seat teaching for a long time, can probably attest to this, that when we start to peel away from the hands-on learning aspect and start focusing upon technology with e-learning and online learning and virtual reality and all those other kind of props and things like that, we tend to have a muscle memory loss. And when it comes time for the actual call, we see that on the actual fire ground. Departments that are small in size. So where I work, for example, I can't say where it is, but where I work is a small city. And our call volume is not as great as, say, the city of Toronto, which is about 2 hours east of us. So our call volume being a lot less, the number of calls that we go on for the types of incidents, such as structure fires or vehicle accidents or other things that are of a high risk nature, are also decreased. And so with that decrease in number of calls and the types of calls, the muscle memory skills don't get exercised enough, which is why we have to train. And if we start decreasing our training aspect as far as, well, let's peel away from doing hands-on training and focus more on the technology side of it to help us get to the training end of our goal, we're going to see that muscle memory loss. And unfortunately, it brings in a disconnect between or from the firefighter and the skill they are learning. Disconnect, such as what? Well, the weight of something. The disconnect of the weight. What does a 24-foot ladder feel like for one firefighter to carry? And as they do it over and over and over again, it becomes an accustomed weight. They're used to it. But when they only do it once or twice and it goes back on the truck and sits there for months, years, and they go back to grab that ladder again for the first time in a few months or a half a year, all of a sudden it's, hey, it's a big surprise. This ladder weighs a lot, but it's not. It's because they're not used to it. They're not accustomed to the weight of that ladder. And the same thing goes for everything. Pulling hose, water weight in your 2.5 inch or 65 millimeter hose, or the water weight in 1 3/4 inch, 1.5 inch hoses, all that needs to be accustomed to. And when we peel away from that and focus more on the hands-off learning, we lose that disconnect between the weight and the feel of things that we need to be familiar with. Along with that, the sounds. Think about sounds that we are going to hear on a consistent basis when we do things like AutoX, how that door sounds when it pops, or metal being crushed, or when we're trying to open things up. We're using Sawzalls and other things we use for auto extrication operations. There's a certain sound that we can hear. Pump operations, the same thing. When you're a good pump operator, you're going to be pumping that trunk operating that pump by sound. And when you hear a different pitch of something, you know, hey, something's wrong, and your ready can look where it might be in the pump panel and get it fixed right away. Same thing for the guy in the nozzle. If you're flowing water on a consistent basis with hands-on training, you're going to know what the sound of that stream should feel and sound like when you're flowing proper, adequate water flows. And so that connection has to be there with the weight of things, the sound of things, the feel of things, even the smell as well, to a certain degree. Helps to familiarize that firefighter with the skill set they're trying to master for themselves. And that only comes with hands-on. So technology helps us to get there, perhaps by delivering some theory, honing in on some of the key points by doing some online learning through a chapter or two, hitting some of the highlights with the content for the cognitive ability. But then it's also got to be the application of it. And the application is where we do the hands-on as opposed to the online and the virtual reality and so on. And so from this perspective, we have to ask the question, are we trying to make things safer by using this technology platform? And if we are, is it safe? Because in the long run, if I'm disconnecting myself from the weight and the feel and the sound and knowing how to use my equipment, when it comes time to use it, how safe will it be for me at that point in time? And that's a question we have to answer for ourselves for the most part. Let's move on to our fourth topic, or fourth question, which is going to be hands-on training. Oddly enough, again, kind of dovetails into the previous one. Are we training to reality with our hands-on classes and our hands-on sessions? As I mentioned, we are a hands-on business, and we respond to reality, not virtual reality. And so even though we may have technology with virtual reality means to put on goggles and to see what fire may look like, how it may develop quickly, we still need to put ourselves in that position to realistically experience and see for ourselves what that looks like, what it feels like, and how we overcome and combat it with, in this case, water and our hose lines. And so we have to curtail our hands-on training sessions to match what we're doing on the fire ground. And so the famous mantra that I always preach when I'm teaching, and it's in one of our books we wrote for the residential fire rescue class, is we have to train as we play, or as you play. And you look at your own playground where you respond to, that's your playground. You have to know what's in your playground and how you're going to respond to it. And you must train to your playground. Train as you play. And we can certainly relate this to professional sports or other elite special teams that have a very high risk nature job. Besides professional sports, we look at things such as, say, Navy SEALs or Green Berets or some kind of special forces where their job is to do the high risk operations behind lines. They have to train consistently for the reality of what they do. And they don't train always in a classroom or with virtual reality. They are training with those, but also on the actual field, practicing it for real. So when it comes time to doing it for real, there's no disconnect. And that same mentality has to be brought into the fire service. We have to train as we play. And so we're setting up our hands-on training classes. Are we taking the time? Are you, as an instructor, taking the time to set things up, get things in place to allow that connection to be made, that it's realistic to a certain degree? Now, we can't have no boundaries in terms of no safety features and just kind of throw that out the window. We have to have safety in mind when we're training, absolutely. But we can do it safely, but also realistically. And when we do it in that fashion, we're going to make that connection, allow the firefighter to be able to reinforce or enforce themselves as far as a muscle memory, and to allow them to make that connection and to make the application in that manner there. So are we trained to reality? We want to make sure we're making that muscle memory enforcer take place, which is going to be the hands-on skills and the hands-on training. Lastly, let's look at a topic that now is going to focus in on the individual. We've looked at from a broad spectrum of department in terms of different aspects of training in our fire service today. I want to really focus in lastly on you, the instructor, as well as myself. I'm in the same boat as you, instructing here. And the question you have to ask yourselves is, who do I need to be an effective instructor? What makes me a good instructor? And you have to first look at and say, well, when I was in the beginnings of my fire service career and I had other people teaching me, were they good? Were they bad as far as instructing, their instructor style, how they taught, what they taught? If they were good, what made them a good instructor? And start studying those aspects and taking those different aspects and applying them to your own self and your own life. And so who do I need to be? Well, I want to be a good instructor. I want to be an effective instructor so that when I'm teaching, I am not wasting my time or the student's time for nothing. That when we are putting an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 and a full week together as both a team together, instructor and student, that the time is being used effectively. And when they leave, they can say, yeah, I learned, that was great. I learned something. That was fantastic. The way they delivered that topic was excellent. Out of the ballpark, home run. It wasn't mundane. It wasn't boring. They weren't talking mundane as far as monotone voice, and weren't looking at their phone while trying to teach. They were actually focused on me, focused on the class, and making sure I've got a good experience from my time here. That's who you need to be. It's who I need to be with regards to being a good instructor. What else? You got to be flexible. Flexible, adaptable, because our current day today, as I mentioned, we're going through an unusual time as far as this pandemic. We got to be flexible in how we're going to deliver our training. When can we do it? People who are attending, I may have to now do this 2 or 3 times as opposed to only once. Or makeup nights for those departments that have, your weekly night for Monday, and one guy can't make it, he's got to come back and do it again different night. So being flexible is going to help you be a good instructor, as well as adaptable, overcome and adapt. Open-minded. Okay, again, there's things that are coming down that we have to look at, study, technology, new tactics in the fire service, new information, new science, or revealing science from before that's just been resurrected rather to us today. We have to look at this, all of it, and have an open mind to say, okay, is there a place for that in our department? How does it relate to our operations in our department? And if it does, great. Let's cherry pick what does and what doesn't, and let's get this information to our firefighters, and let's arm them with the right information and the proper information to make them both effective and efficient. But aside from that, what makes you a good instructor is going to be you and what you do for yourself in terms of professional development. Even though we're facing a shutdown right now as far as conferences and going to do hands-on training, we can still attend and we can still seek out for ourselves those opportunities to get training. Ever since this has been going on with the coronavirus in March to today, there's been an influx of free training online with uh, different weekly podcasts or virtual casts with videos, live streaming sessions with different instructors. So there's lots that we can go and seek out. It's a matter of us going and finding where it is and taking part in it. And so our professional development doesn't just stop because of the pandemic. It has to continue, and it's got to be a continuing evolution for us to help us better ourselves in the long run to be that effective instructor for today's fire service and for tomorrow's fire service. Because the young kids of today, they're going to get older, and there's new ones coming in, and those new ones coming in must also be addressed and looked after and dealt with in terms of developing their skill sets and their minds for the fire service. As well as that, we need to know our limits. I need to know my limitations. I can't teach everything. I don't know everything, but there are some people who are experts in certain areas that I'm not. And so knowing my limits is going to help me to be a good instructor. And if I got to teach a class, and I'll admit to you right now, on something that's involving fire investigation or inspection, I'm not the guy to have come teach it. I'm not the expert, but I know people who are. And so that's my limitations. I am not able to effectively teach or instruct that subject matter to a group of firefighters because I myself don't feel confident and know my limitations. So know yours. And you can't do it all. Instructors who think they can do it all, they're going to burn out. And it's going to be very evident when they start trying to teach that they don't know what they're doing and they are not meant to be there at that point in time. So don't embarrass yourself. Know your limitations and call it at that point in time. Lastly, be humble. Do not be condescending. Do not be conceited. You're no better than the next guy. I look at myself, I am no different than the other guy and the other firefighter who I work with or I teach with. I am nobody special. You're nobody special. We are all the same. We all fight the same fires. We have the same passion, I believe, of what we're doing as far as instructing and teaching in the fire service. And so we need to be humble. And having a attitude of humility is going to help you to be a better instructor, to be an effective and good instructor. Those that are condescending and talking down to the students, they're not productive. They're not going to get anywhere. And all they're doing is planting the seed in that person's mind about, I don't want to be here. That guy's a bad instructor, and I'm getting a bad experience overall. And for the most part, maybe bad skill set, which down the road is not going to be very useful for that firefighter. So be humble. And when you're humble, you'll be amazed how well your class will receive you in that manner. So there's our quick fast attack roundtable on training today's fire service. And if you have any questions, we'll take some time right now and we'll answer those questions for you as best as we possibly can.
Great, thank you, Mark. Yeah, and any additional questions, we'll enter the question period now. If you have any questions that you would like to ask, feel free to type that into the user interface. Question number one, Mark, with the canceling and postponing of many fire conferences for 2020, where and what can a person do to keep up with professional development?
Okay, so we kind of, for a bit, touched on this in the last little segment there, but as I mentioned, if you go online, there's lots of, well, today, for example, virtual conferences that are taking place, such as the one for today that people can participate in. But just generally on the internet, there are a lot of manufacturers that are publishing free training content with certain key name people. I can think of Elkhart, for example. They're doing every week on Wednesday night. They're doing a live broadcast with two of the Elkhart brass tacks guys, and along with them a special guest. So it might be one week Kurt Isaacson, next week it could be a guy from New York City, it could be Mike Champo, or it could be Ray McCormack or Brian Brush. So they have that every week that's free to dial in, and you sit there for an hour and learn. Besides that, with manufacturers, there are lots of groups like the Hogtown Fools, for example, in Toronto, that are putting on semi-bases, like a video virtual training podcast or round table discussion. That's also allowing people to dial in, no charge, it's free, but there's learning content available that people can glean from and help to keep developing themselves professionally. So there's lots out there to look for it. Do a quick search on the web. You'll find emails coming in also telling me, hey, we got this coming up, sign up, it costs you nothing. And at that point, you're getting some free training.
Awesome. Second question is, why is the training officer position so hard to fill in so many fire departments?
That's a good question. That's almost a whole topic by itself. But real quick with our time frame, I guess my observation, my perspective, we're not making the training officer position a coveted position in terms of a person who is there by competition because they are the elite of the department. What I find today, a lot of training officers that we have in departments, whether it's full-time or volunteers, small, large, medium size, is usually, hey, we got a spot for a TO, who wants it? And you're crickets. And a lot of times people who are maybe going towards retirement age will say, well, okay, I'll kind of go there. It's a way to go into retirement, for a few years. It's not going to be as stressful physically. For others, it could be other reasons, like they have physical disabilities that they've brought on now from the job that allows them to do this part, but not the firefighting part, or simply it's someone maybe got strong-armed into it. I need a training officer, and you're going to be it. So away you go. We're not making the TO spot a competitive spot where it's going to be the cream of the crop, go through the competition process, and we're going to pick the best person because of their skill set, their knowledge, their attitude, their character, what they're doing themselves. And by doing that, they're going to get the best person. So unfortunately, we're seeing an absence of that for quite a long time. And because of those, my observations, I think that's why there's an absence or a lack of those people that should be there not being there. And there are those who are there and should not be there, they are there, unfortunately.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation. You provided many takeaways for the audience. Firefighting in Canada has made a donation to the Canadian Fallen Firefighters Foundation on your behalf in appreciation for your time today. We'll now take a brief break and be back in our seats for 2:15, when we'll turn our attention to the critical topic of mental health. But before we part, please stay tuned for a quick message from our sponsor, AquaEye by VodaSafe.
The AquaEye allows you to act extremely quickly. It only requires one rescuer to operate.
You would wade out to waist deep, start firing the unit, and then within seconds, you're able to sweep the entire region around you.
The AquaEye can revolutionize the way that first responders react, so there'll be no waiting for divers or helicopters. Rescuers can act immediately and hopefully save lives.